So when the Rona pandemic began, our leaders assumed emergency authority to deal with it. And of course, they've been holding on to that authority ever since. Now they're trying to make it permanent. Of course, you hand someone power, it's pretty hard to get it back. Case in point, new guidelines proposed by the New York Health Department would allow the state to force COVID-positive citizens into isolation. The policy would essentially return emergency COVID powers to the governor, who has never been elected governor. So in a moment when we're all fretting about democracy, is it real? Here you have someone who's not actually the governor pretending to be the governor. Kieran Lawler is actually a New York State Assemblyman. He was elected. Well, you were elected, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so you're legitimate. Your governor was not elected, so she all of a sudden wants quarantine powers for eternity? How does this work?
Well, her disgraced predecessor, Governor Cuomo, actually instituted these quarantine powers back in March of 2020, and they're temporary at the moment, and they have to be extended every 90 days or every 60 days. But this governor, as COVID cases go down, seeks to make these powers in the executive branch with no checks and balances permanent forever, without any legislative authority. So not only is she not elected, she's not asking the elected branch of government, the elected lawmakers in the state, to help out with this. She's doing this unilaterally. And I wouldn't want this governor to have these powers. I wouldn't want an elected governor to have these massive powers. And it's not just COVID positive patients. It's anybody who's been exposed to COVID or a communicable disease. So what does that mean? You were exposed, therefore we're going to whisk you away and put you in some gulag, and you have no due process rights. Maybe after you've been in the gulag for a little while, you might be able to petition a court if you can get a lawyer. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. It may sound a little far-fetched, but think of where we've come in the last 2 years. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we thought if you wanted to go to church, you'd be allowed to go to church. New York State, for a period, said you couldn't go to church in certain places. New York State is crushing free speech and First Amendment rights. And this governor, in the past month, went ahead and fired union medical workers and replaced them with the military, replaced them with the National Guard. So when you put it in that context, it doesn't sound that far-fetched.
Yeah, what we used to call conspiracy theories are now just called breaking news. So, of course. But again, I'm fixated on this question. Here's someone who no voter in the state of New York declared, I want to be governor, who somehow, through hitting the lotto or something, is posing as governor. Has any defender of democracy, all the self-appointed democracy defenders, Liz Cheney, for example, piped up and said, hey, unelected fake governor of the Empire State, pull back on your quarantine powers, you're not God? Has anybody noticed this?
I haven't heard anyone say that. I haven't even heard members of our own party here in New York State say that. You know, this was actually proposed as a bill in the past and never got anywhere in the legislature. I think even if passed legislatively, this kind of power would be unconstitutional.
Yeah.
You know, they're basically throwing away habeas corpus in New York State if this were to become law. But this is done in the executive branch with no checks and balances. And actually, I was on your show about 13 months ago talking about that bill, Tucker, and afterwards, a reporter from the Daily Caller called the Cuomo administration, and they said, that's an insane idea. There's no way we would ever pass that bill. But at the time, we didn't know it. They had given themselves this power, and all they have to do is ask themselves, can we extend it for another 90 days? Can we extend it for another 90 days? It's only Kathy Hochul now who's trying to make it permanent as COVID starts to recede.
Yeah, and if we're saying that anybody who's been exposed to COVID qualifies for involuntary quarantine, that would include about 345 million Americans, because there's not a person who hasn't been exposed to COVID. Like, this is really ridiculous. I appreciate it. Kieran, thanks so much for coming on tonight.